The human male sat on the alien planet's surface, staring at the wreckage of his ship, and wondered if he was going to die here. The crash was hard, but not life-threatening, or so he thought at first. His body had been battered, bruised, but nothing too serious. His mind, however, had not quite processed the fact that he was stranded on an entirely foreign world with no means of communication. That was when he saw them, alien females, a group of them approaching, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they weren't used to human visitors. They walked with an odd, almost regal grace, their eyes wide in curiosity, as if they had never seen a human before. It was strange, considering this planet was far from uninhabited, and the female figures didn't appear to be alarmed. The first one, an alien with teal-blue skin, approached him and raised a delicate hand, much like a human might, but instead of a handshake, she pulled him into a tight, bear-like hug. The force of the embrace nearly knocked the wind out of him. He awkwardly patted her back, unsure of how to respond. She grinned, completely oblivious to his discomfort. "Welcome," she said in a voice that sounded like a mix of bells and wind chimes. Thanks," he managed, trying to pry her off him. "I think—" She tilted her head, confused. "What does thanks mean?" That was the first sign. He pulled away, trying to process the situation. The other girls were staring at him, their expressions fascinated but devoid of any understanding of personal space. One of them raised an eyebrow and stepped forward. She was smaller, with pale lavender skin and antennae protruding from her forehead. "What does it mean to greet?" she asked, practically bouncing in place with anticipation. The human male blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. Well, greeting means like saying hi. You shake hands or nod or—" He trailed off. The women didn't seem to grasp it. Instead, they crowded closer. One girl made eye contact and promptly cupped his face with both hands. "I see you," she murmured, her voice laced with a sense of awe. Another one laughed softly and poked his arm, clearly amused. "What does this do?" His patience began to wear thin. "It's just normal. Just normal. I need some space here," he grumbled, half laughing at the absurdity of it all. "You know, where I come from, personal space is a thing." They all stepped back slightly, but only because they seemed to have no concept of why space might matter. Their alien eyes blinked in unison, seemingly puzzled by the sudden shift in his body language. The teal-blue one tilted her head again. "You are strange," she said slowly. "Yeah, well, I'm from Earth. We have a lot of things that are strange, apparently," he replied, still rubbing his sore ribs. "For example, you guys don't seem to understand what personal space is. Or how to say hello." The alien girls looked at each other, exchanging glances. They seemed intrigued but not quite understanding. Finally, the lavender-skinned girl spoke up. "Why don't you teach us?" The human male couldn't believe what he was hearing. He took a deep breath and considered his options. Being stranded on a strange planet with a bunch of alien females who clearly had no idea about human customs was one thing, but now he was being asked to teach them about earthly behavior, romantic behavior no less. He half expected to hear a "gotcha," and realized this was all just a prank. But it wasn't. All right, he muttered, trying to wrap his mind around the absurdity of the situation. "I'll teach you how to be civilized." He paused, giving them a pointed look. "But we'll start small, okay? First things first. We don't hug strangers like that. You don't just grab people and—" He cut himself off, realizing that in their eyes, his protest likely seemed ridiculous. They all looked at him as if he had just spoken the deepest truth in the universe. "Why?" the teal-blue one asked, her hands still poised mid-air as though waiting for permission to initiate another bear hug. "Because," he said, struggling to keep his composure, "humans don't do that unless they know someone really well." Another alien girl, slightly taller than the rest, stepped forward and looked at him with bright golden eyes. She had an almost mischievous gleam in her expression, one that made him wonder whether she was about to ask something absurd. "What about kissing? What does kissing do?" she asked innocently. The human froze, his mind momentarily blank. He hadn't prepared for this. Kissing? This was getting way too real, too fast. Well, he began cautiously. Kissing is… He hesitated. He didn't want to go into all the details. He didn't even know if he could explain that to them in a way that wouldn't make it sound strange. Kissing is a gesture, all right? People do it when they care about each other. But you can't just… Look, there are rules, all right? It's not something you do on a whim. You do it when you trust someone. But why? The lavender-skinned one asked again, her big eyes wide with genuine curiosity. Because it's intimate. It's something private. You can't just do it with anyone, or it's just awkward, he tried to explain. But you did not mind it when I touched you. The teal-blue girl chimed in, a puzzled look on her face. No, that's not the point. This is different, he said quickly. And, you don't just randomly do stuff like that. A few of the girls exchanged confused glances. How do you know when it's time? The mischievous golden-eyed one asked. Is it a signal? His face flushed a little. He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. I think you guys need a crash course in human relationships, huh? The alien girls nodded eagerly, their faces lighting up as though they had discovered the secret to the universe. Okay, he muttered, looking out across the alien horizon, already trying to figure out what to teach them next. Lesson 1. Don't kiss unless both parties are really sure about it. You can't just go kissing every stranger you meet, all right? They all nodded again, but this time, they looked even more determined than before, as if they had learned a sacred truth. I'll have to teach you everything, won't I? He muttered under his breath, realizing he'd become some sort of accidental relationship guru to these alien girls. How in the world was he going to get out of this? The human male sat down on the grass, trying to collect his thoughts as the alien girls surrounded him. Their faces were filled with anticipation, like students waiting for a lesson to begin, and he wasn't sure whether to laugh or pull his hair out. He had just come to the realization that he was stuck on a planet with a group of well-meaning but completely clueless alien females, and it seemed like the crash wasn't the only thing that had left him wrecked. All right, let's get started, he said, slapping his hands together and trying to put on a brave face. Today, we're going to talk about the basics of human relationships. The first thing you need to understand is, well, flirting. One of the alien girls, a tall, purple-skinned one with sharp, almost predatory-looking eyes, tilted her head and raised a hand. Flirting? She asked, her voice low but full of intrigue. What does it mean to flirt? Is it like hunting? He blinked, not sure whether to laugh or cry. No. It's not about hunting. Well, not in that way. Flirting is more like expressing interest in someone, but in a playful, subtle way. You don't just rush in with it. You, do it slowly. Like a dance. A dance? She repeated, frowning. Like moving your body? He blinked again. No, not exactly. It's about, saying things that make someone feel special. Compliments, light teasing, showing that you find them interesting. But you do it in a way that isn't too forward. You can't just leap at them. She stared at him as if he'd just spoken in riddles. So, I don't leap at them, she said slowly, as though writing down notes in her head. Exactly, he said, trying not to sound frustrated. Flirting is subtle. For example, you might say something like, you have a great smile, or I like your energy. It's kind of like a signal, showing that you're interested without coming off as desperate. The purple-skinned girl nodded, but there was still a look of confusion on her face. So, like when I show my teeth? Is that flirting? He shook his head, unable to suppress a chuckle. No. That's not flirting. That's more like showing aggression. Human flirting is soft, smooth, kind of like a nice breeze. The girls were looking at him like he was speaking an entirely different language, and he could feel his patience beginning to fray. Still, he powered on, trying to teach them, despite the ridiculousness of the situation. Okay, next, he said, trying to focus. Let's talk about touch. In human relationships, touch is important, but it has to be consensual. If you want to show affection, you can touch someone's hand, shoulder, or maybe their arm, but you can't just grab them. One of the alien girls, a smaller one with violet spots on her face, raised her hand. So, when I want to show affection, I grab them? She asked eagerly. No, he said quickly, jumping to his feet. That's not how it works. You don't just grab people. You have to gauge it. You have to see if they're comfortable with you first. Look for signs of interest, like if they lean in or smile. And then, if they feel comfortable, you can touch them. But always ask first, with your eyes, your body language. Don't just. I understand, she said, cutting him off with a grin, completely misinterpreting his frantic gesture as an invitation for more hands-on instruction. She reached forward and put her hands on his shoulders, giving him a firm, almost too firm squeeze. He froze, his body stiffening at the touch, and then slowly peeled her fingers off his shoulder. Not quite. See, you gotta read the signs better. She blinked, completely undeterred. You did not like it? She asked innocently. No. That's not it. I wasn't prepared for that. He rubbed the back of his neck, trying to remain calm. You can't just. One of the others piped up, seemingly excited by this new revelation. So, if I want to express interest, I can touch him? Only if he looks like he wants it, he snapped, but quickly realized his tone was too harsh. He cleared his throat. Look, you're getting the wrong idea. Touch is about building trust, not about jumping in. The smaller alien girl still seemed eager to try again, as if she hadn't quite gotten it right. If I touch him, then I know he likes it? No, he groaned, rubbing his temples. Okay, forget the touching for now. Let's go back to flirting. He tried to calm down, taking a deep breath. Flirting is about talking. And maybe some mild gestures. You don't go straight for physical contact right away. You build the connection. The girls were nodding now, some of them still confused, others more eager to jump into the lesson. I want to try now, the purple-skinned girl said, clearly intent on putting the flirting lesson to the test. She looked him over with intense scrutiny, as if she was sizing up her next move. He barely had time to react before she leaned in close, her nose nearly brushing against his cheek. You have a very strong aura, she said, her voice rich with sincerity, though she still had no idea what she was doing. She pulled back, grinning expectantly. He stifled a laugh, caught between amusement and horror. Okay. I guess that's a start? But, maybe don't invade personal space quite so directly. You've got the compliment right, but you need to make it less intense. The girls were hanging on his every word now, with wide, expectant eyes. It was like teaching a class of eager students who had no idea what they were doing but were determined to get it right. You have to be subtle, he continued. For instance, you can say, I love the way you look today, or you're looking sharp. But you don't have to invade someone's personal space, like, say, getting right in their face. But I do that when I want to show affection, the purple-skinned girl said, her eyes growing wide with realization. But you said I should not do that. He sighed, shaking his head. Exactly. It's all about the space between you, about making sure the other person feels comfortable. One of the girls, a tall, slender one, raised her hand with an excited expression. What if we want to show more interest? More than a compliment? He rubbed his face, realizing he was in way over his head. Okay, now we're getting to the tricky part. More interest is, well, you start slow, build emotional connection, and if you feel the same way, you can move toward a more intimate gesture. But again, it's all about timing. The smaller alien girl seemed to ponder this, her head tilted to the side. So when we start slow, does that mean we go in slowly with our touching? Yes, exactly, he said quickly, relieved that she seemed to get it. It's about pacing yourself. You don't rush it. Just let it happen naturally. There was a moment of silence, and then all the alien girls suddenly looked at each other. A buzz of whispered excitement filled the air, and he couldn't help but wonder if he had just signed himself up for an entire new level of awkwardness. The human male sat back, rubbing his temples in frustration. The alien girls had, somehow, made his lessons even more difficult than he'd anticipated. After days of teaching them the basics of flirting, romantic gestures, and touch, he thought they might have caught on, but instead, things had only gotten weirder. His patience was being tested in ways he never imagined. He barely managed to escape the last lesson, where they attempted to demonstrate subtle flirting by staring at him for an entire hour without blinking. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they were back for more. "So, today," he said, keeping his voice steady, "we're going to talk about boundaries." One of the alien girls, a deep emerald green with a pattern of golden swirls running across her skin, perked up. "What are boundaries?" she asked with wide eyes, the question innocent but full of the promise of something awkward. "Boundaries are about knowing where the line is between what's okay and what's not okay," he explained, forcing a calm tone. "It's like when you meet someone, and you don't just dive into their personal space or touch them without permission. You need to read the situation." She nodded seriously. "So, like when we stand really close to you but you don't want us to touch?" "Exactly," he said, feeling a small sense of relief. "It's about respecting the other person's space and comfort zone. If they step away, you don't chase after them. You need to let them have their space." The emerald-skinned girl stared at him blankly. "But we've been close to you before, and you didn't move away. Does that mean you want us close?" The human groaned inwardly. "That's not what I mean. I mean if someone, anyone, moves away, you give them space. Don't follow them like a shadow. Like this?" The girl stepped closer, her body practically pressing against his side. "I think you like it when we're close." "No!" He practically jumped up, stepping back. "This is exactly what I mean. You can't just assume someone likes it when you get close without understanding if they're comfortable with it. And don't read into everything, okay?" She tilted her head, looking like a curious animal, and smiled. "But you didn't back away this time. Because I'm trying to teach you. Not because I like it," he nearly shouted, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about compliments." "Compliments?" one of the other girls asked eagerly. She was a pale blue with silver streaks in her hair, and her eyes were so wide it looked like they might pop out. "What do you mean by compliment?" He sighed deeply. "Compliments are things you say to make someone feel good about themselves. For example, you can say, 'I really like your style,' or 'you have a great sense of humor.' It's about showing someone you appreciate them without being too forward or weird about it." One of the girls, a slender violet-skinned one, nodded enthusiastically. "So we tell you that we like you?" she asked. He rubbed his eyes. "No." "Well, yes, but you don't just blurt it out like that. You don't have to be all serious and intense. It's more casual, like, oh, I don't know, telling someone their outfit looks great. Or that their hair looks nice today." The violet-skinned girl immediately lunged forward, grabbing his arm and holding it up to her face. "I like your hair," she said, as though announcing a discovery of the century. "It's so shiny." He blinked rapidly. "Okay, that's a compliment, but you don't just grab someone's arm to deliver it. That's not how it works." She looked utterly confused. "But you didn't tell me to stop. You didn't pull away." "That's because I was trying to teach you," he muttered, trying to regain his composure. "And it's not just about compliments either. You have to be aware of how the other person reacts." "And what if they don't say anything back?" she asked. "Does that mean I can touch more?" He could feel his brain shutting down. "No, you wait. You don't rush things. You see how the other person reacts to your compliment, and if they seem comfortable, then maybe, you move forward. But you don't just dive in." "I see." She stepped back but kept eyeing him with that same unblinking stare. "So when you tell us we're doing well, you're giving us permission to be closer?" "No, no, no!" he exclaimed, practically throwing his hands in the air. "You don't get it. Just because I'm teaching you doesn't mean you get free rein to do whatever you want. Another alien girl, with smooth, silver-colored skin, looked up from where she had been watching them with rapt attention. So, what if we wanted to kiss you? She asked, her voice serious but with a hint of mischief in her eyes. His heart sank. You what? Would it be okay if we kissed you? She repeated, her expression showing no sign of hesitation. Okay, we are not doing that. He took a deep breath, trying to control the panic rising in his chest. That's not how this works. You don't just kiss someone without understanding what it means. She looked disappointed, but not deterred. But we have been practicing kissing each other, she said, sounding innocent. We watched the other girls do it to each other. His mouth fell open. Wait, what? You've been, what? Yes, we wanted to learn about human relationships, she said brightly, as though she were discussing a routine study session. So we thought maybe you would show us? Show you? He repeated, his voice rising. You guys have no clue. Kissing is intimate, and you don't just go around kissing people to practice. The girls all looked at him, and the silver-skinned one shrugged, clearly unfazed. We'll figure it out ourselves then. No, he practically shouted. You can't just figure it out by experimenting on me. He rubbed his forehead, feeling the headache coming on in full force. You need to understand that relationships aren't some kind of experiment. It's about trust. And it's about mutual respect. The violet-skinned girl stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. We trust you, she said simply, smiling. He froze. You trust me? He repeated, feeling like the world was spinning. Yes. You're teaching us. We like how you are teaching. So we trust you to show us how to connect. To kiss. At that moment, he couldn't decide if he was going to laugh or pass out. Instead, he just took a deep breath, rubbed his face again, and muttered, You have no idea how complicated this is. The girls all stared at him intently, like eager students in a classroom, their innocent faces showing only curiosity and excitement. And as much as he wanted to run away, he knew there was no way out. He was the teacher now, whether he liked it or not, and these girls were determined to figure out the mysteries of human relationships, one awkward moment at a time. The human male stood in the middle of the group, feeling more like a deer caught in headlights than a teacher. His patience had run dry, his nerves were frayed, and yet, the alien girls around him were still looking at him with wide, eager eyes. They were so innocent, so unreasonably eager to understand something as complicated as human relationships, and yet, every lesson seemed to veer into a new level of absurdity. If only they knew how complicated love really was. But he brought this on himself. He was the one who'd offered to teach them. And now, it was too late to back out. Okay, he began, trying to steady his breath. Let's wrap this up, all right? You all seem to have the basics down, but we need to talk about the next step. The real deal. The real deal? One of the girls, a striking red-skinned one with orange eyes, asked eagerly. Yeah. The next level. Let's talk about intimacy, he said, grimacing slightly. But before we go into that, you have to understand something. Intimacy is about trust. It's not just something you can force or... He caught himself. Well, you can't just rush into it, okay? Trust, the red-skinned girl repeated thoughtfully. Like when we share our food? No. Not quite, he said, realizing how ridiculous the question sounded. It's more about emotional closeness. Being open with someone. Being vulnerable. And you can't force that. It happens naturally, over time. You mean when you allow someone to touch you? Another alien girl asked, her voice a soft trill. She had light green skin and a curious, calculating expression. Isn't that intimacy? When we hold you. He rubbed his face. No. That's not exactly what I mean. You can touch someone to show affection, but that's not all there is. Intimacy is about sharing your emotions, your fears, your desires. It's not just physical. It's mental, emotional, and spiritual. So if we touch you in a special way, will we be close to you? The green-skinned girl asked. No! He sighed loudly, frustrated. That's not how it works. You can't just touch someone and expect them to be open with you. You have to give them time. You have to build trust. He paused, trying to collect his thoughts. You don't get that from just touching or making physical moves. The red-skinned girl didn't seem convinced. But when you touch us, you're showing trust. That's what we've learned. No, he said, shaking his head. You're showing affection. Trust is different. Trust is deeper. It's knowing that the other person will respect your boundaries, your needs, your feelings. You can't just rush things. She still wasn't getting it. She took a step closer to him, her face serious. Then how do we show trust to you? He took a deep breath, trying to keep his calm. You don't need to show me trust right now. You need to learn about showing trust with others. You need to understand it yourself before you can ask anyone else to be part of that. But we've already shown you, she said earnestly. You've been teaching us. And we trust you. You're safe. He froze, feeling an uncomfortable chill running down his spine. Safe? Yes, she said, her voice almost too serious. You've been teaching us all this time. And we trust you to guide us. So we can trust you to help us become closer to you. Her words hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. He quickly tried to redirect the conversation, not wanting to fall into that trap. Okay, he said quickly. But you can't just assume trust automatically means that you can do whatever you want. You have to communicate. You have to respect someone's boundaries. Another alien girl, a pale, silver-skinned one with delicate features, stepped forward, her eyes wide with curiosity. But how do we know when someone wants to be close to us? She asked, her voice softer than before. How can we tell if we've done something right? He stared at her for a long moment, trying to figure out how to explain the subtle intricacies of human emotions to beings who seemed so unfamiliar with them. You'll know when you get it right because they'll show you in their actions, he said slowly. If someone doesn't back away, or if they lean in when you speak, that's a good sign. If they smile at you or touch you back in a gentle way, that's a good sign. But if we misread the signs? She asked. You need to stop and check in with the other person, he said. Ask them how they feel. You can't assume, not in relationships. The girls looked at each other, processing this new information. It was as if he had unlocked a part of their understanding, but there was still something fundamentally alien about the way they were interpreting everything. They couldn't seem to stop themselves from taking things too literally. And every time he thought they understood, they would somehow twist it into something even more complicated. He glanced around, trying to gauge the mood. All right, let's talk about consent, he said, his voice growing weary but determined. Consent is essential. If you want to take things further, whether it's a kiss, a hug, or something more intimate, you need to ask first. You have to make sure the other person is comfortable. The girls looked at him blankly, as though they had never considered the concept. Ask? The silver-skinned one asked. Like with words? Yes, he said, half exasperated. With words. You don't just assume it. You ask. You check. You make sure they're comfortable with what you're doing. But how do we know when we're allowed to ask? One of the other girls, a dark purple-skinned one, asked cautiously. That's the tricky part, he said, rubbing his chin. You have to build up to it. You don't just dive in without understanding the person's boundaries. And if they say no, or if they seem uncomfortable, you back off. It's that simple. The girls were silent for a moment, clearly processing everything he had said. He could tell that some of them understood, but it was like trying to teach a child how to tie their shoes. Some things just took time. And even though the lesson seemed to be taking forever, he couldn't give up. Not now. And if they say yes? The red-skinned girl asked. Well, he said, trying to keep his tone steady. If they say yes, then you can proceed, but only if both of you are ready. And if they change their mind later, you have to respect that. So if we kiss you and you don't kiss back, it's not okay? She asked, her voice thoughtful. Exactly, he said, surprised that she'd caught on so quickly. You can't just force someone into it. And it's not just about physical actions. It's about emotional readiness, too. You can't expect someone to want something just because you want it. The girls nodded slowly, their expressions softening as they took in the lessons. He could see the wheels turning in their minds. But the underlying truth was that these alien girls were still learning what it meant to be human in ways he couldn't have imagined. And as frustrating as it had been, he realized that the journey wasn't over. He still had more to teach, more to show, but somehow, this had become something more than just a lesson. It was a partnership, an exchange, a learning process for both of them. I think we understand now, the red-skinned girl said, stepping forward. We can trust you. Good, he said, smiling weakly. I'm glad you're getting it. But remember, it's not just about physical actions. It's about emotional connection. That's where the real trust lies. As he finished speaking, the girls gathered around him, their expressions soft but earnest. They weren't just interested in romance anymore. They were starting to understand what it really meant to be human. And, in some strange way, they were teaching him something too. Something about patience, about understanding, and about the importance of trust in any relationship, no matter how complicated.